I'm Lauren Sorkin, and I am the executive director of the Resilient Cities Network. As we begin, I'm actually going to ask everyone to close their eyes. Let's close your eyes. And I'd like you to take a deep inhale through your nose, and then an exhale. And now I want you to think of your favorite spot in the city or place where you live, specifically a spot in nature. And take one more big inhale. And exhale. And when you're ready to, you can slowly open your eyes. In my, I would say, fun employment, I've been leading yoga practices for over 20 years, but I've also been a resilience practitioner for almost the same amount of time. I don't know how many Spanish speakers I have in the room. How many Spanish speakers do I have in the room? Okay, a few. Cinco. We say, el diablo es más diablo que viejo que por sabio. The devil is more devilish because he's really old than because he's really bad. And the reason I share that phrase and I share that exercise is because I don't have a PhD in resilience, but I've become an expert in resilience by practice. And in fact, resilience is a practice. It's something that every city and everyone can get really good at by continuing to practice it and keeping those things in mind. And it is, like most practices, very, very simple to start. And so as we started this panel with my very distinguished panelists here who are going to dive into public-private sector partnerships and how we apply that to resilience, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes actually talking about what is that principle? What are we talking about when we talk about urban resilience, and what are we trying to do? And in fact, the breathing exercise has the answer. And so if there's one thing that you remember about anything that I am going to say, not what they're going to say, because that's going to be more brilliant, but anything about what I'm going to say during this panel, it's this. It's that urban resilience, like the breath exercise, is just simply about doing one thing that solves for multiple problems. Right? Our cities are on the front lines of so many of our problems today, whether those are climate impacts like heat or floods, whether those are social issues like crime and violence, or whether those are economic issues like the changes in our economy that are then causing unemployment. Our cities are on the front lines. It's our job to keep in mind what are those solutions that are going to solve for those multiple benefits and prioritizing those above all others in a principled way. So that's all. Now with that, I'll also offer a couple of things from the more than a decade of resilience practice from Resilient Cities Network. How do we actually define urban resilience? What is it? Urban resilience is actually the capacity of individuals, communities, businesses, and institutions within a city to survive, adapt, and thrive no matter what acute shock, sudden shock, or chronic stress they face. And there are many different kinds of shocks and stresses. Now, we have been working in the Resilient Cities Network with over 100 cities and counties for the last decade, and you can see here where they are. And I thought it might be helpful in the context of this to share with you a little bit of data from our CRO survey, where we ask our cities, what are they the most worried about? Because in fact, some of those things might lead maybe some of the solution providers here to come up with even better solutions for resilience challenges. So in 2023, we asked our network, what are the top shocks that they're facing? And you can see here that the top shock globally in 2023 was flash surface floods, and that's followed by flooding of rivers and heat waves. And that actually took the place of some of the things that we'd seen in previous years. The shocks, obviously, that we saw during the COVID years had to do more with health. But environmental shocks are back at the top of this list. In terms of the top stresses, and this probably won't come as a big surprise to many in this room, but climate change as a stress, overarching systemic stress, was at the top, and closely followed by lack of affordable housing and traffic congestion. Now, what do we do as a network? We, as a network, one thing I've learned about running a network is you have to do what your members want you to do. And so we have designed our services and what we do to actually support our members through 3 parts of their resilience journey. The empowerment part, which is tools and frameworks that we develop for our cities. And I think one of the most important things we do through empowerment is actually connect cities peer to peer. We also implement programs, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment, and we mobilize investments for them. And that's some of the work we do at the private sector. So in terms of those programmatic work that we do, we work on climate resilience, circularity, and equity. And I could go on for a long time about different kinds of programs and solution sets, and I'd be very happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk about the specific programs and solutions under each of these thematic areas, but for the sake of time, I won't. But what I do want to emphasize is that what we do cultivate and curate and what is accessible, I think, to anyone who wants to be involved with this community is we have 100 progressive cities in the world who want to implement change at scale. At any given time, they're running about 4,000 different projects across their cities that need solutions and investments. And it is city leaders and its chief resilience officers who are driving that change day in and day out. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about city resilience and actually turn it over to a city leader to tell us a little bit more about the work he's doing. So, Erion, over to you.
I don't know where to start. I could have checked all those boxes. I remember my first year, we had a major drought. It didn't rain for 182 days. And then, of course, the experts say, Mr. Mayor, you're going to be fine. Eventually, it will start raining. So then the second year, it started pouring. We had constant floods. And my third year, it was this big fire wave. And then again, the experts say, no, Mr. Mayor, once in 100 years, you have a flood like this or a drought like that or fires like this. It's happening also in Australia, in California. And then on my fourth year, it snowed in the Mediterranean. So I came from a place this morning that was 40 degrees to this weather. And it snowed. And of course, the trolls are, Mr. Mayor, where are the snowplows for a place that it snows once in 100 years? And again, the experts were right. They said it only happens once in a century, so we're going to be fine. And then we had a major earthquake, in 2019. The last earthquake was in 1905, so the experts were again correct. Once in 100 years, you have this. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. And again, the experts were again correct, because since the Spanish flu was exactly, 101 years.
You were 8 times lucky.
So they really hit the spot. And then after COVID, because Tirana houses the Iranian, or some members, 3,000 members of the Iranian opposition, we had a large cyber attack that pretty much killed all of our services for about a month. So other than the terrorist attack, don't inspire anyone. I could have checked all of those boxes. Now, the joke is that, or at least the metaphor is that, sure, it does happen once in 100 years, but now it's all packed within our mandates. And stuff that used to happen in our grandparents' generation, it was like a memorable event that they tell you endless stories about, how the Spanish flu changed their life. Now it's happening too fast, and all of a sudden, every year there's a centenarian event. So the question is, how do you prepare for this, and how do you deal with this? Now, I come from communist Albania, of course. So I was the last generation. I was 10 years old when communism collapsed, and we had no private property. Actually, God was forbidden. It was the North Korea of Europe. It was the only atheist country in the world officially, although there's other psychopathic regimes that discourage faith. But this was in constitution, and private property was abolished. Everything was collective. So the word volunteer and co-op is a dirty word now that we're in capitalism, because it reminds us of those poor days where people were actually doing slave labor. But also because of the rough capitalism, the casino capitalism of the 90s, the word capitalism and public partnership, PPP, is a dirty word, because this is all the capitalists that want to take all the stuff. So the question is, how do you go through this transition and because I think the subject is, how do you bring the private sector into the foray? So after the earthquake, we lost about 42 schools in the city. Now, being a refugee is a terrible thing anywhere. But usually you associate it with leaving a war zone or leaving poverty or leaving a climate disaster. But being a refugee in your own city is really terrible, because what decided was not a conflict, it was not a border that you changed, but it was actually a calamity that made your weaker building collapse and then made your neighbors on the other side of the street stronger buildings stand. And putting tents in a city doesn't work. So first thing we did is we called all the Airbnbs. We called Airbnb and Booking, and we said, tell us all the free rooms in the city. And then we will pay for it, because we can't afford to put tents and divide neighbors and destroy the ecosystem. So basically, we were able to work with the private sector, and within 24 hours from the earthquake, we started accommodating people in all the available Airbnbs in the vicinity, so kids could go to the same school and they could attend, they go to the same supermarket, and the grannies could go to the same coffee shop and be able to resume life almost immediately after the earthquake. Because I think the trauma of being a refugee and being sort of split from the community in such an abrupt way is dramatic. The other thing was, how do we get institutions right back? How do you rebuild 42 schools? I mean, if you do the tender and the procurement, it will take forever. It'll take probably 3 mayors after me I looked at the histories of mayors in Italy, in Amatrice, in Potenza, a country that is a member of the G7. 30, 40 years after the earthquake of Potenza, they're still busy rebuilding in the old traditional way. So we said, well, here is a moment where we should capitalize with the private sector and get them all on a program, and we pay in installments, but build all the 42 schools in one go. Now, state-of-the-art school, the whole Build Back Better attitude. But again, when the rules and the bureaucracy of the state is so slow, the private sector can move in, and you can still use the same installments to pay for the next 20 years, but have the 42 schools, the next year after the earthquake. I don't know if we have some more slides to show. I don't know if... Oh, there's a ticker? All right. And this is the housing that we did after the earthquake. I didn't put many slides, so you didn't need to see all the drama of the rubbles, because it's not fun. But there are ways to incentivize the private sector and to say, look, we will split the bill. We will allow you to build in some of these areas, and you can use the parking and you can use the commercial space, and then get us for free on state land, because that's the compromise, get us for free all the apartments. Again, something that enhanced us to recuperate in a much faster procedure. The same thing goes about some public initiatives. During communism, everything belonged to the state, not to the people. So when you are in a free democratic society, that you destroy everything that belonged to the dictatorship, including parks and trees, because they're all communist. I don't know if you have seen a communist tree, they're terrible, green, and all of that. So, but this culture, this appetite for destruction, used to be a Guns N' Roses song, was almost as coming out of prison and taking revenge on the people that kept you in this nation-shaped prison or state-shaped prison for 45 years. So taking anger on nature as a way to sort of vindicate the poverty was terrible. So the question is, how do you recuperate the green land, the green spaces, and all the erosion? We're not a rich city. So we had to change a few things. So we said, look, we want to plant 2 million trees by 2030. We've already done over 1 million now. And the city didn't pay for any of them. And we decided to say, well, look, we can't afford trees because we need to do the schools and the kindergartens but what we can afford is to get every kid to plant a tree for their birthday. And we calculated we have exactly 170,000 kids, and for the last 9 years we've planted exactly 170,000 trees every year, because it's the school children. You don't want to be the only kid in the class who hasn't planted a tree, because then this becomes sort of like a trend, right? So it's fantastic. They get a GPS location, the whole family shows up, or the whole class. And then you do this also with the corporate community. You say, look, this is a time of crisis. Please don't fund any more Miss Universe or Miss Albania. We don't need any of that. But we do need to put your corporate responsibility money into this orbital forest that uses reservoirs and turns them into lake parks. And then this domino effect where the city is surrounded by these parks. But also the moving from the metaphor of having roots in a place to the actual physical activity of putting roots in a place. Because a kid who plants a tree will never cut a tree. But once you have an army of 170,000 kids who become literally tree huggers, because it's their tree for their birthday and their events, then it can absolutely transform, because they are taking care of the tree because the tree grows with them. So if it's a drought, they'll go and water it, or if there's been a wind, they'll see if the branches fell, and it's been fantastic. We're over 1 million trees now. So the point I want to make, because I don't want to bore you to death to all this stuff and my dramas, but the point I want to make is that if Tirana, Albania can do it, any city can do it. I have not met any mayor, and trust me, I've been re-elected 3 times. This is my last dance, as they say, because you can only run 3 times. I've met just about any mayor. I have not met one mayor who says, I have a lot of money to spend, and I have a surplus. Every mayor whines and complains. There's never enough. The question is, and what we realize, that the biggest infrastructure project is not measured in billions, is in centimeters. It's 10 centimeters from here to here. This is the mentality of those who lead, but also the mentality of those who get involved. And if you change these 10 centimeters, you can do rebuilding after the earthquake, 2 million trees, you can do big plazas and events. I don't know if there's more pictures, but it's probably the final one. And you can see the film, the parents come, the grandparents come, and mom and dad, and this is your tree, and you know the GPS location, so you can come back. And so in that regard, I think changing mentality is the hardest, but also the most important piece of infrastructure to change. There are brilliant mayors out there, but if you don't involve the people, and also including the private sector, and maybe on the second round I can say a bit more, then being brilliant and being energetic doesn't help, unless you crowdsource the public to be part of this effort, and sometimes even the private sector, even in the most anti-capitalist country in the world.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot more to come back to. I sense that there's a pause that wants to happen. I think it's a lot more. But it's so clear, right? That you have a vision of how you wanted the private sector to be involved, and it's about people, right? And multiple generations, which is beautiful. And we will come back, because I know there's more I want to ask about multiple generations, housing, banking, et cetera. But Mette, I want to come to you now to share with us some of your experience on public-private sector collaboration. Do you want to click?
Yeah, I want to click.
Okay, you drive.
Thank you. This one. No, yeah, okay. Like that? Yeah, do that. Okay, this is just a brief look into what we are doing currently. We work with nature-based design, connecting people with nature in cities, making them resilient, but also making them livable, making people connect with nature, because we are nature, we are embedded in nature, but we seem to forget it. We work with maintenance design in existing parks, rewilding them to create space for life, large-scale landscape-led planning projects in UK, in Canada, and but also in the Nordic cities. So creating resilient neighborhoods is definitely empowered by nature. That's our mission. Our purpose in everything we do is that we are a nature-based design studio, and we create space for life, and that includes all life. So it also includes, it's not open? I'm gonna do the guide trick, that's better. Okay, all life, also including flora and fauna. So biodiversity and the biological values is a discipline that we put into our interdisciplinary studio a long time ago and invested in it. And now clients, public, private, are actually demanding it. And the value proposition of having this discipline into the design and planning of the future cities that we live in, the value proposition is both on climate, economic, aesthetics, and social. And to be honest, Stephanie said yesterday, what's kind of struggling? And to be honest, the social value is the hardest one. That's something that we sense, that's something that we feel, but how do we actually start with conditions that includes social empowerment? So I'll get back to that. 20% of the population in Denmark lives in social housing area. On the back of increasing crimes in the specific social housing area of Denmark, the Prime Minister in 2018 for his New Year's speech said, well, we need to fill in these gaps. We need to diversify the social housing areas with other types of housing, owned housings, etc. And that came with a series of regulations, a series of rules to implement and to densify and to transform these neighborhoods. And this red dot is a social housing area just outside Copenhagen, 8 kilometers from the town hall. So a bike ride. Copenhagen, Denmark is super flat, as Helle just shown. And the local residents, there's around 2,000 houses, has in Denmark, in the social housing unit, they have the mandate to choose. So we had a huge participatory process. We actually had a shop in the neighborhood, debating, discussing what's in it for us. How do we actually become part of this transformation? The area is surrounded by pristine nature, preserved nature, but that's not part of, outside the door. That's basically lawns. So how do you actually make and understand the assets of the surrounding nature and include this into a transformation of a neighborhood like this? That's basically what we do. And we even increased biodiversity, so the quality of nature, not the massing of nature. So this is one of the largest infill master plans that we did, and we literally try to it's like going inch by inch, understanding the context, adding in private houses in these large-scale courtyards, and basically creating spaces for people to meet both formally, parking their car, distributing their garbage, collecting their mail, buying their groceries, where they have a destinations, and in those routes you have possibility of creating informal meetings and creating bonds between them and us. So existing residents and new residents. We started by, together with building architects, making these prefab 8 townhouses. And when they were put to market on a fairly low price, fairly low market price, they had about 1,200 motivated applicants. So that and that couldn't fit in these 8 houses. So 20% of these houses were also allocated for the existing residents to move in to be part of this transformation of the area. But of course it gave the private developer, I forgot to say that this is like a public-private partnership between a private developer who is investing in this site, buying off land from the social housing unit, densifying and diversifying the residents of this area. And in between the houses, there's small allotment gardens where all residents of the area can actually rent it for doesn't cost you anything, but you need to sort of do it. And all the public space is shared space. So all the public, it's actually facilitating meetings between them and us. And now the developer has really sort of got motivation to do much more, and we are in the midst of construction of around 1,000 new homes.
I was just going to say, how many more of those 1,200 applications are they going to capture?
It was a beauty contest because the 1,200 applications were then asked to do a specific motivated, what would you bring into this neighborhood? And then they had 117 like written families wanting to live here. And literally we hadn't recognized that this would happen. Another thing that is a new, at least in the Danish context, is that if you buy a house here to a certain, to a low market price, you are obliged to stay for 5 years. If you don't, you have to put half of the profit into the district association. Does that make sense? That's a new one in Denmark. I haven't never heard about it before. But that is also an incentive to stay a little longer and to just don't, get profit and etc. So creating a space for life. The residents love it. This is Ida and Vaska, who were the lucky ones with their little son, and they love living there. They feel safe, and because we did this infill, then we were able to keep as many of the large existing trees. This project has been ongoing since 2017. We are still not there, so that's definitely a long-term planning, regulation, preservation, etc. This project happened in 10 months. It's the largest student housing in Scandinavia, 1,300 student houses. It's before and after. The before is more like transit. Maybe it would aspire young people to smoke. I mean, that's the only aspiration that I get. But we did this project for a really, really low square meter price, only native species. We actually reused some of the trees that were on ground on this corridor. And the foundation that paid around 300,000 euros for this project, including our fee, they were there. They have tours around the city. What happened with our money? They said, well, I've just been to Highline. It looks a little bit like Highline. Highline is like the most expensive per square meter in the world, also maintenance-wise. So, but a nice aspiration, I guess. That's all.
Thank you so much. So I think we've heard pretty clearly so far how you lead for creating urban resilience and inviting the private sector, and how you design for urban resilience between the public and private sector. And now, Ivo, we are coming to you to find out actually, how do you bring investment in innovation for urban resilience? Does this resonate with you? Where is the investor in this value chain?
Thank you. I have to say, actually, on a personal level, all these projects resonate quite well with me, but I'm representing the investment side of things here. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, right, there's these two sides, public and private. I only have 2 slides. I was actually asked to provide maximum 1 slide, so I have only one concrete example for you, which I'll show later. But let me talk a little bit about both the private side and the public side, and what do they actually look after in a PPP, right? And I think the private side, why is it even interested in doing a PPP? Because I mean, we as investors, we invest in companies, and the companies, they want to do projects or sell their products, right? And they could also do that purely with other private actors, right? But why do they sometimes go to work hand in hand with the public side? Well, often it actually gives them access to projects they otherwise wouldn't have access to, right? Which is quite interesting and lucrative for them, right? The second thing they're looking after, and I have to clearly say this, is also they're looking for an adequate return, and there's just no way of talking around that, right? We've heard before, let's split the bill and so on and so forth, but let's split the bill is just a colloquial term for saying, okay, you give us something and you make your money elsewhere, right? Because, I mean, either it's philanthropy or it's like a investment that seeks actually a decent return, and very few people are actually willing to say, we want a return, but we're happy with a mediocre return, right? That's not what they do, right? I mean, either they gift money or they want an adequate return. What they're also looking after, and this is where it sometimes gets tricky, but it can be both an advantage or a disadvantage, is planning security, right? And sometimes it's actually an advantage to be dealing with the public hand, right? Because you can say, oh, there's very little, I don't know, credit risk and so on and so forth, or you have a long-term horizon. But where it can get tricky is also if you do long-term projects and then you start a project and 3-4 years in, maybe there's another mayor who all of a sudden has a completely different idea of things, right? And then it can get messy, right? I think what the public side is looking for clearly is, on one hand, financing, right? Because that's the main part the private side brings, but also the private expertise. Because even if funds were available, the private sector has experience in realizing large-scale projects, and it would be difficult for cities sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, right, to do these things on their own, even if they have clear ideas what to achieve. And you're looking for some sorts of risk sharing at the end of the day, right? And there's all sorts of models. There's a continuum of like risk sharing and also operating models and so on and so forth, ownership, I have just one brief example before we'll go back and start a discussion of a company we happen to know well and have been invested in for some time, which is a company based in the UK called Segro. I'm not sure if any of the London-based people have actually heard of either this project or the company. Segro is actually one of the leading developers, owners, and operators of industrial real estate, with a particularly strong footprint in the city of London, where roughly half their portfolio is located. And one of the projects they did is called East Plus, Progress Through Partnership. And it's basically a project that has happened and is still happening. It was started in 2016 with a envisaged time horizon of 10 to 15 years. There has now been an intermediate review and it's ongoing. And in 3 Eastern London boroughs that you can see here on the map, there was the following situation. There was some heavy manufacturing there many decades ago, which gradually started to move away because it's not economically viable anymore. And then all of a sudden you have these vast areas of land that are somehow deserted. All sorts of problems start showing up. Illegal activities, they're being used as dumps where people illegally dispose of waste. Also some other things, I'll show you pictures on the second slide. But actually it's quite well located land because despite it being far from the city center, it's right around this highway ring, right? So the City of London, represented by the Greater London Authority, which has a subsidiary, Greater London Authority Land and Property, GLAP, worked out this plan with Segro, who said, like, okay, we can do a holistic development and focus on our core competency, which is develop industrial real estate, but go a bit broader this time and don't only look at, we want to buy some land, we want to build some properties and rent them out, but also look at the areas holistically. Also in these 3 boroughs, there was virtually no connection between them. And what can we achieve together? And what has happened so far? Project's still ongoing. Around, how much is it here? 630,000 square feet of industrial land across 56 individual units that you can rent have been created. There are 50 businesses. It's actually quite a vast and wide array of businesses, from manufacturing to food preparation to logistics, even like film studios and so on that are in there right now. Segro has invested 120 million pounds so far to develop these. But what was in it, and that was the main attraction for Segro, right? Like build properties, that's their core competence, rent them out. But what was in it for the City of London is represented by GLAP. So first of all, they got rid of all the problems, the crime and the dumps and so on. Secondly, there was employment that has been created. I think it's around 800 jobs right now as we speak, a bit higher than what's here on this chart right now. There was also a strong focus on environment, not only for the properties themselves, who are like EPC A+, therefore have a net zero footprint, but also they didn't build on all the land, but 20% of the land needed to be used to enhance biodiversity of the site. And also even some education, so they set up a social program, community program, which has lots of little projects that are ongoing, and the initial budget has already been doubled. And it goes even as far as some of the Segro employees, who are like highly skilled people working in the City of London, they do mentoring for people in the area. Yeah, and this is just to show you, for instance, here on the left-hand side, how these things looked before, and then, yeah, how things look after. So just one little example that we happen to know about.
Thank you, Ivo. I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. Thank you. Okay, so we are the panel after lunch, and also all of my amazing panelists have very sonorous voices. So we are going to do another resilience solution, and everyone is going to stand up. Okay, stand up. And then I want you to turn to the side, and I want you to tell the person next to you the place you were thinking of during our quiet meditation earlier. So what was that natural place you thought of in your city? Okay?
Lake Park.
Lake Park.
Next to my paddle court.
Oh, nice. So you play paddle. Okay.
What were you thinking?
I was actually thinking of this Parc de Cervantes in Barcelona, which has the roses up on the hill and has a really nice view of the rest of the city. Yeah.
Fun place.
Okay, now I have to get everybody to quiet down. Okay. Now we have to sit back down, so take that and pass it on. Okay. Now you have to sit back down. Now we have to sit back down. Great. Well, now your energy is up, which is really good because we have part 2 of the panel. Otherwise known as part 2. Okay, great. So when we were preparing for this panel, I asked the panelists to think about something that works in their experience and something that has not worked. So now we're getting into the juicy details, okay, of public-private partnerships. So for the second round, that's what the panel is going to talk to us about. So something that's worked really well in their experience and something that hasn't, public-private partnerships. And then we're going to open it up to the floor. So with that renewed energy that you all have now, I'm expecting some really excellent questions for this panel, okay? So resilience benefits, we've solved the challenge of losing attention and losing energy with one simple solution, right? And hopefully now you're all thinking of really great places in your cities as well. Okay, good. So I'm going to turn it back to you. Something that's worked and something that hasn't worked.
Well, other than climate or weather-related calamities, I think issues of employment and issues of housing are extremely important. I agree, housing should not be a beauty pageant, but it should not be an episode from the Hunger Games either. So people killing for a house. It is my belief, and I'm a socialist, I have proof, I have a rose here. So I'm a lefty, of course. But I also believe that housing should be considered a human right. I grew up in New York, and to have a normal scenery of 70,000 people living in the world's richest city, idling by in the ventilators of the metro, and consider this a normality. Or, when I was growing up and was a student in the US, Lombard Street was so much fun. It's like Gotham City now, because it's and this is the middle of wealth, Palo Alto. This is all the major inventions you have in your applications in your iPhone, including the iPhone. So I think it depends on how you see it. If you see it as a human right, you treat it as a human right. I mean, just the way you do hospitals and the way you do schools, you also do housing.
Yeah, so it's broken in most cities. It's broken in most cities.
So one of the things that we take a lot of pride is that to have zero homelessness, and this is not the richest city on earth. But there are ways to do it. First, first you change the 10 centimeters and you say this is a priority. People should not live like animals. There are no stray dogs. And humanity at its best is tested on the way the cities treat the issue of housing. There's a few schemes that we've worked, and some do work with the private sector. One is emergency shelter for anyone caught outside. It could be someone from a conservative family in a rural area and an LGBT young person that got kicked out. It could be someone who came out of prison. It could be someone who was violated, family violence and this woman, the kids. People have all kinds of reasons why a tragedy has happened and interrupted their life. To have that interruption be treated as the new normal and to not have the city intervene with its full power, to me it's a crime. So emergency shelter for anyone, it doesn't matter, even if they're not your residents. A place where they could go to the toilet, take a shower, brush their teeth, change their clothes, and take a nap. That should be mandatory. Second, what we do is for anyone who cannot pay rent, and this is a few thousand families. So does it take a toll on our budget? Of course it does. But the question is, what better thing you have to do? I mean, what other things can't wait if this can? This cannot wait. So the topping up we have a few thousand families, and every month the council has to have a mandatory meeting to pass and approve all the families that can't reach the market price for rent. For those who are doing a bit better off, but still are very young, they need their first home, then we partner with the private sector. So we ran a bid with the banks, and we said, look, instead of paying rent every month, why don't they buy half a square meter every month? So why don't we get zero interest loans? We do it for up to 1,000 eligible families. So they have to be young, meaning both the cumulative age of the couple is to be 70, so 35 each, with a kid or two. So really need of their professional career, starting a new life in the city. So then we do affordable housing. People were surprised because we got OMA. I don't know who's here from the Netherlands. But OMA is a famous Rotterdam firm, probably one of the most expensive in the world. So we convinced them and say, look, this is an exciting city. Everything is happening in Tirana. You need to be in here. And we're not going to hire you for a posh project, but work with a private investor for affordable housing scheme. So to be able to buy in this day and age, even in the Balkans, 500 euros per square meter from an OMA-designed apartment, that's something that you cannot beat. And then on top of that, there is now, for the last 10 years, a rule where every new building has to give 3%. So out of each, other than paying tax, which of course used for housing, they also have to have 3 units in 100 for social housing. Because what happens in most cities, they do this called the projects, right? Or basically it's a ghetto, where you say, let's pull all the poor people in this place so they're out of our sight and we act like it doesn't happen. Well, that's not integration, because you're basically bringing all the tragedies together as if it's a Alcoholics Anonymous group. And when everybody sort of whines and complains about their tragedy, which gets them even more into that traumatic experience. And having this system with the private sector and that disperses the housing, that gets people to live in all different, and has variety in the neighborhoods, and has people to move up and scale up, that is interesting. And then one last example, that works very well. One last example on the issue of employment. I grew up with a single mom that sewed shoes, because 25% of the city's economy output was shoes, and the other 25% of the output was textile for Armani, Versace, but all the design is done there, little knowledge being transferred, 200 euro jobs, always vulnerable because they can go further east. So we said, well, wait a minute, the city, the mayor may not be the Minister of Employment. I was Minister of Employment before, and I love this much better. But this, being a resilient city, you have to think of what will people do in your city, not just for fun, but also for a living. So we started 10 years ago and said, look, we cannot be the capital of cheap labor and textile and shoes. We're going to be the high tech of the Balkans. So we started teaching kids Scratch, and then we work with the private sector. We found a group in Armenia that does the Tumo Center, and then we found in Palo Alto, Plug and Play. We found in Paris, École 42. So now it's a digital human right to go and take a free course for the jobs of the future. So in 10 years, the city went from the capital of textile and shoes to now the capital of tourism and IT in just the same proportions, 25%. It's simply that the pizza is bigger now. The slice is still 25% for these replacement jobs. So I think mayors and city leaders can work with the private sector. And now it's easier even for us, now that all the IT firms are in the city, you say, well, now you should use your philanthropy and pay back to the city. But my 2 takeaways is housing should not be Hunger Games. It should be a human right. But preparing a city for the jobs of the future should treat digital literacy also as a right for children to be prepared for these jobs. There will not be the same jobs that their parents did. And here the private sector has great contributions to give.
Thank you so much. Coming to you, Mette, something that has worked very well and something that's not working that you'd like to see being done differently.
We are the lead landscape planners of transformation of Earl's Court in the center of London. England has this national BNG, biodiversity net gain, where you should analyze, do a baseline, and then prove that you will leave it 10% more biodiverse before getting a building permit. So that's a very good start, and we don't do that in Denmark at all. I don't know other countries who does it. Maybe
no, it's
there
a leading
is
regulation.
Yeah, anyhow. So we are doing this from the public space part. The total site only has a footprint of 40% of buildings, which leaves quite a lot of space into public space, infrastructure, etc. We have a consultancy in this it's a public-private partnership, of course, that keeps track of the KPIs on the city nature. So how you, in a very initial phase, then it all, development plans like that always change over time. Their only sort of job is to keep the KPI and inform us as planners to how to navigate in order to ensure that the initial KPIs. I've never tried that before, and that's a major achievement, and we learn a lot from being in that public-private partnership as a landscape lead planner. Another thing that where we learned it the hard way is that we made a 11-hectare big park in order to increase safety in the largest social housing area in Denmark. 70 nationalities lived there. It was to undergo a huge transformation. So how do we create, and it wasn't safe at all. And again, the residents has the mandate. It's a democratic process, participatory process of understanding how do we create a safe environment in the outdoor space. And we did that. So the participatory design process was as long as the design process and parallel. And then we finalized and inaugurated the park. And then the resident came to us, well, there's no lawns. And we always meet in lawns. That's how we meet. That's how I was just like, okay, I'm sorry, but the upside is that that's feasible to change it. But again, it's around. That's honestly what some of the issues that we're dealing with. How do we make the right? So back to the Earl's Court, how I would really like to talk to people that are super good at understanding and getting the right program, but also getting the design in iterations in the process.
Yes.
For us, design is in all phases, even in maintenance.
So important, so much there, and I think there's probably a lot of people in the room who will want to engage on that more. I will hold back from doing that, but I do think that there is a lot that happens between the big ideas, the leadership, and then the action, right? And the process and getting that sequencing right. And it's fair to say that sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't, right? And it's really good to be able to share that and also to be vulnerable. So thank you for that. Ivo, you shared with us some things that worked really well. I don't know if you want to share more or if you also want to tell us something that you've seen that's not working.
No, I just wanted to say I think I gave a good example of something that did work well. And without giving a concrete example of something that didn't work well, I can say a few high-level things. So first of all, I mentioned in my introduction that one of the properties of a PPP is risk sharing. But this is always at the onset of a project a very theoretical concept, and then when things go wrong, it's actually interesting to see who actually bears the risk and if people are still happy with their portion of the risk they're sharing, right? And without going further into detail, I would also want to say the example I gave you is a good example because it's basically you rent industrial property, which you rent to private companies, right, who are either in logistics or manufacturing or what have you, right? And they will pay the rent they're able to afford, and they're bound by the market, supply and demand. When it comes to things like housing, or also things like utilities, for instance, there are lots of PPPs in the water space, like or electricity and so on, becomes much more touchy, I would say, right? And then you can ask yourself the question, are these really the appropriate projects? Because, yeah, they're the... I don't know, the private sector might have different expectations on what's an adequate return for them versus like the notion of, no, this is a basic human right? And I mean, I've also looked at things like in Berlin, residential projects, for instance, they had the requirement that actually 30%, not 3%, but 30% of any units developed in the projects had to be like social housing with a nominally fixed rent for 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. And then, okay, the developer can try to make it work by renting out the other 70% at market, but still it creates a little bit of a conflict, right? And also like, then who gets access to these if there's not enough for everybody and so on, and with the housing shortage we're having. So I would just say there are areas that lend themselves easier, like the project I showed before, to doing these things than more basic utilities or housing kind of projects. Yeah,
I think those are such important points, and it does come back to the fact that, again, the frameworks can be very global, but the action and the leadership has to be local, right? You have to come to a common understanding of what the norm is. If you start with that everyone should have a house, but then knowing at what rates and where you can find the finance to bridge that gap is a really important point. I want to open it up to the audience now with all the energy that you derived from your sharing. And I am looking around to see who has, there's some questions. Lady in red is asking with us. Okay, so do you want to go for it? I think Peter had a microphone, but I'm going to share mine.
Hi, I just question for Ivo. I know the project that you were talking about. I just want to ask you, how do you check on the investment stuff in terms of the local jobs created, the education programs, jobs for local people? So, you know, those stats are great, but I wonder how do you go back and check that that's actually happening? And my supplementary bit is who was there before? So, you know, there were displaced peoples from that site. They were travellers, Roma. So I just wonder how that all squares the circle, really. Sorry, difficult one, I know.
No, it's two very valid questions. I have to honestly say that on the second one, I do not know the details, and it's a consideration that's maybe not on top of investors' minds. But the first one is actually very important because it goes in the direction of greenwashing and how to avoid it, right? And it is a bit difficult for us as investors, right? And with a company like this, for instance, we've been invested in for a long time. We do regularly also go to these sites and they show us around. But still, for these statistics that I've shown you, we do rely on third parties, right? But given that GLAP is involved and I think they have a very vested interest and also need to justify themselves towards the people and the electorate, right? There are intermediate reports being done regularly by independent third parties. So we have a high level of trust that actually these numbers are correct, right? But in other instances, it might not be as easy, right? And you cannot just blindly believe, the company is self-reporting, okay, also environmental credentials, this is an EPC A+ rating and this is all doing good. And I think on your second question, which I cannot answer, these are actually things, that we probably don't even have on our radar. Are there other secondary effects that we're not considering, right? This is definitely very tricky.
Question for Mette, wonderful work you're doing with SLA in Copenhagen and other places. So the question is to then prolong the public-private collaboration into the maintenance of the green space, right? Which is often the issue. How do you maintain the quality, the commitment of the local residents? Can you say a little bit more about, was maintenance agreed clearly during the design process? Who was involved during the years after, etc.?
Can I just ask, I want to take the other two questions and then the whole panel can answer.
My name is Michal Mlinar. I'm the acting executive director of UN Habitat. And of course, for us, it's housing, it's urban planning, it's resilience, it's a lot of things. Thanks for sharing the great experience. Just one small addition or question related to that, and that is on smart cities. We will talk about that in our own presentation a bit tomorrow. But even in Ukraine, which I had a chance to visit recently, where there is a lot of destruction, the smart cities context and the digitalization area has resonated a lot. It has helped to move things forward. So to all of you, maybe a quick reflection on how to also connect the dots on between resilience and smart cities. Thanks.
Question for Erion, but then also for the panel. I appreciate the affordable housing and also equitable housing, but question is that with homelessness, large driver for homelessness is lack of public health care, also mental health care and mental psychiatric hospitals. And so question was, how do you approach that?
Okay, so there's 3 questions. Did you want to answer first?
Maintenance question.
Oh, and M. Let's bring sexy back.
Yeah, really? All right, it's on. Well, it differs a lot. I mean, we have 100 new projects a year and we are 130 employees. So we definitely do like a wide span of projects. But in maintenance, we always try to get it in as an incentive in the start. But we also do maintenance of existing lawns, where we simply through the budget of maintenance are changing a lawn to a series of natural spaces. We've done that in the city of Ørestad, so that's between the city center of Copenhagen and the airport, which was basically surrounded by quite fantastic nature, but the public space was just lawns. So we tried. Our key is that we try to lower maintenance, lower maintenance and increase value for nature and people. That's kind of. But we sometimes maintenance in our projects. It's actually going. This big park in a social housing area that we did. It's 11 hectares. It's the largest park we have done so far. but there we are training, but also exchanging knowledge with the people who are maintaining by simply taking a walk in every season. So that's 4 times a year with the people who do who are experts in maintenance design within SLA. And then this question about smart city. I never really got the concept of smart cities. Cities, sorry to be a little bit abrasive. I know it's about technology, but it simply not sticks to our part of the business. I know that there's a lot of GIS, there's a lot of data that you collect that can inform the transformation. We do work with that. But I mean, cities are systems that responds to our demand and needs. So they are as smart as that demand as the investment and the companies that actually do transformation of the cities. Do you understand what I mean by that? But from our point of view, I can't understand why we don't do more city nature. There's the value proposition. WHO has just stamped a survey done on GIS, satellite data on a million children in Europe. And the ones that had everyday explorations, enchantment in nature, minimized the risk of mental diseases, the 17 largest, by 50%. It's so much cheaper to plant. It makes our cities so much more resilient, much more livable than to recover these children. And mental health, well-being is increasing by triple. In Denmark, it's by triple in the young generation. So I simply don't understand why we don't do it. So a smart city would, from my point of view, be understanding the growth medium, understanding the soil, understanding the microclimate, and make that intervention in order for creating a livable city.
So, I'd also like to respond to that, if I may, and it's actually quite interesting to hear Mette's answer. And I have to say, I run a fund that is called Smart City, and I don't disagree with your statements, but I think it comes down also to how do you define smart city. And this is not a fixed term, and there are these two schools of thought, and one is what I would say a very narrow definition of like putting technology everywhere and measuring everywhere and therefore responding, versus the other one is more holistic, looking at like improving quality of life of city residents, improving outcomes. And there the solutions can often be very low tech, right? Tech can sometimes help us understand the problems or the solutions better in the first place, but right. And then to make the link between smart cities and urban resilience, I was asking myself this when I was asked to join this TKF here, because I thought like, okay, I'm doing smart cities. Is it actually the same? And we had a discussion also with Lauren very quickly, right? This goes back to what is actually urban resilience, response versus prevention. And I think, well, the smart city angle can clearly help in the response type of dimension, right? And like also emergency shelter and so on and so forth. At least if there's a problem that happens, you can realize it quickly with smart city concepts and find the answer. But the more powerful ones are even prevention with the right design of things, right? And that's more that's also smart city, right? For me.
We were toying around in the office with all these now AI engines, and so we asked one of the machines, and we said, one of these chatbots, and I said, what is something AI cannot do yet? And the ChatGPT said empathy. Empathy for people, to feel for people, to relate to people. And I think we need empathetic cities rather than gadgets everywhere. And I think driving the conversation towards the common sense city, stuff that makes sense. Laura and I, we met at Barcelona, and they do the Barcelona Fair. And, they invite some, mayors to talk, but mostly they want to sell you their stuff, right? And it's so obvious, because, the panel when you talk is just 1 hour, but then, there's hectares of gadgets that you can buy. And so this company comes after a talk. So, well, you know, you sound like a progressive mayor. We have this thing. Since you won the Green City, we have this. It looks like a panel from the Berlin Wall. It's like a furniture for the pavement, and you sit, you charge your phone, and then they've done this artificial fake fungus, and then you put it in the plug, and it sucks up the air, carbon filtrates, and then releases oxygen. And I said, well, how much is this? And they said, it's 250,000 for you, maybe 200,000. And I was like, well, that's pretty impressive. I said, that's a bargain, because it said, you know, this thing that sucks up carbon and produces oxygen, in Albania we call it a tree, and it's much cheaper. It doesn't have to be done. So, and then the other joke, it was actually the anecdote story. Last week I was sharing with Lauren, we had the Interpol, the international police, and they all came to Tirana for their big Interpol, you know, cops convention. And they're looking at the data. I said, you know, how did this become from the darkest place and the most criminal enterprise in the region, now the safest place in Southern Europe? And I said, what do you think? I said, well, you must have thousands of cameras and police everywhere. I said, no, we just have a lot of playgrounds. And, you know, of course, the big cops were like, well, what's the relation with the playgrounds? I said, you put a playground in front of a building block where you've had problems, but we put it everywhere. We do one a month as the ratio of the city's progress with children. And I said, but not only the kids will come and play, because usually kids don't come alone. You know, a 3 or 4 year old won't come alone. They'll come with their granny or their caretaker. And I said, grandmothers, at least in Albania, they're the best CCTV camera ever. You cannot get away with a flat screen TV without a nagging granny asking you all kinds of questions and, you know, keeping you there until she's convinced. So sometimes, you know, like we were saying, eyes on the street, having constant events, you know, great initiative from Gil Peñalosa called the 880 cities, not 8 and 80, but from 8 to 80. The Urban 95 initiative from the Bernard Van Leer Foundation was we made all of our urban planners to sit on their knees and try to walk around as a 3-year-old, 95-centimeter human being. And then we said, well, of course they cannot see the streetlights. That's why if you come to Tirana, the whole pole is lit green. And so it's fun to cross the street. It's fun to be in the city because now our urban planners, you know, on our first year, we took a bunch of strollers and gave it to the men who were doing the pavement. I said, try walking around. See if you're a mother or grandmother. See if you can cross the street and if you can go through the bumps. And I think we torture ourselves with brainstorming. We should do more tri-storming. And I think tri-storming makes a big difference and then when you have the people who plan also go in the street and try to cross the street, you know, as a 3-year-old or pushing a baby cart. So that is my take. And I think I've been to Ukraine several times. What's happening in Ukraine with the destruction of the cities is absolutely terrible. But the opportunity to rebuild so much better, not only with energy efficiency, but, you know, go away. I grew up in sort of communist Soviet-looking terrible buildings that look like prisons. And you can't tell. It's a school, it's a dormitory, it's a kindergarten, it's an actual prison, or it's the Prime Minister's office. You know, but they all look the same. So in every crisis lies an amazing opportunity. And what we are doing with Eurocities and a few other city organizations is partner and twin with the city to help really with you know, decent planning and use that terrible disaster tragedy to really come from the ashes as something much, much better. I think they'll really flip Putin off as well. And if pretty things come after the bombing and the disaster. On the issue of the mental care, I think there's plenty of studies out there, but I think more than our lungs after COVID, it was our brains that suffered. And mental care went in a spike, you know, an exponential hike after COVID. And I think we're still reeling from it. In some societies like us, there's a huge stigma to sort of confess that, look, just like my stomach and my heart and my kidney, my brain is sick and needs help. You know, when we say in our culture, Eastern Europe, you know, when we say, oh, my stomach hurts or I have a flu, everybody says, oh, get well soon. But if you say that, you know, your brain, which is another organ that hurts and aches, and say that, oh, he's crazy. And I think that stigma is something that we're working very, very hard to sort of say, look, it's okay, it's just another organ that needs help. And just like we get help for other organs, we should do the same. So We do a lot of work in the social centers, and it's not just soup kitchens, it's not just to fill your belly and to get off the street, but it's also to get case management. And I think social workers today are, in most cities that I've seen in Europe, are fully equipped. But cities don't put funds aside to offer these services. And we put money aside for logopedic training for kids on autism or Down syndrome. And I think now we just have a category of the post-COVID mental effects. And I think the more we destigmatize it, but also put the money where your mouth is. And if you don't fund social workers, then this will be just like a token project. But if you make sure that these kitchens and hygiene places and emergency shelters also have the right, most people that I've met in social centers just need a friend to talk to. I mean, they don't need a Harvard grad, in psychology. So in that sense, I think loneliness is the new modern disease. And I think what happened in COVID is we were just fucking lonely. We were in quarantine and just sitting there waiting for things to open up. And I think that went into depression and other diseases. Now, I'm not a doctor, but again, I understand empathy, which AI doesn't yet. And I think if we looked at this with the scope of empathy, rather than just the projection of how many cases we have out there, I think we can get a lot done. And the cities should be at the forefront, not the hospitals and ministries of health. That's my take. Thank you.
We'll take them and then we'll come back to the panel.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this really inspiring panel, and if I may address you directly, I'm really inspired by your words and your concepts, so thank you very much. Really, it's an honor to listen to you. And when you say, for example, try-storming is better than brainstorming, I feel inspired. And but there's some other words that don't inspire me. So there's one expression that I know that is frequently used, and especially among architects and city planners. And I truly share the concept behind this expression, but I'm not sure if we can reach the people in the cities. And it's the word a resilient city. If I go down in the city center and I ask someone, do you want to live in a beautiful city, in a green city, in a city full of quality, I think everyone will say yes. But if I ask people in the street, do you want to live in a resilient city, then I think they will ask me, resilient? So we have to defend? Do you know about something in the future? Do you know more than I do? So is there a thread you know about and I don't know about? And I think we, among architects, and here in this room, we can talk about resilience, and I think it's a very good word because we know what it means. But the European elections have also shown that we have a kind of a separation also. And when we talk to the people about our resilient city concepts, I truly think we should use another word that is more inviting. That's my perception.
That's a very good point. There's a lot of re-ing going on. I mean, regenerating, reinterpreting, redistributing, reducing. So I completely agree. I think architects, but I don't think it's only architects who has the tendency of using these words. But basically go down to talking about it people to people. We should definitely do that.
We need positive images. And if I think about a resilient city, I don't have an image in my mind. Maybe I'm the only one, but...
Aside from going to a rebranding discussion,
I didn't want to start a discussion.
But I think there's another question, but it's a good concept that we need to see what good looks like. I think that is embedded in the question that you have. It's like, what does good look like when we say we will be beautiful, resilient, healthy, sustainable, right? What is the picture? And I think that's extremely important.
Thank you so much. It was really, really inspiring, all of it. One thing I just wanted to touch upon, you had this sort of notion of housing shouldn't be structured as Hunger Games, but as a human right, and you seem to have some tools for it with the zero interest rate and that type of thing. It's a problem that occurs all over Europe, all over the world. How do you see what you've done? how do we scale that to other countries, to other regions? What would be your suggestions and ideas for doing that?
Yeah, my question is also to you and your amazing strategies, Mr. Mayor, that these are such simple and powerful stories with things that people can do. So my question is both to you and Lauren. How do you amplify these very powerful concepts and ideas across? I mean, I work in the city space for so long. I've never heard about these things. And they're so powerful, they're so simple, and they make sense despite north, south, east, west. So I think you have an obligation to take these brilliant ideas and amplify them. And you have to do it, you have to talk a lot more.
These are great questions. So the question of scale, the question of amplification, I'll let you talk about those first, and then I have something to share, which I'll coordinate.
Sure. So I'll start first with your resilient question. Actually, we don't have a word in Albanian for resilient, so we didn't even bother translating it, and we don't even use it. So the child-friendly city, the cool city, the fun city, the little engine that could type of thing, you know, so we just gave up translating the word, and I hear you and feel you. But I think it's okay that within this group network of knowledgeable people and practitioners to have the resilience based on those categories that the city should be future-proof. I think it makes sense, but you're right. I think we should just not even bother to brand it locally. Now, thanks for the nice words, but let's not make this very rosy. I have a lot of, I get a lot of love. I also have a lot of committed enemies. You piss off a lot of people. And I have a group called, well, they have different names, but it's basically a lock him up. They do weekly Molotov cocktail protests with fire in the city. They burn my effigy. So it's not all a walk in the park. And sometimes with these oppositions, the para-fascist groups, is the smaller they become, the angrier they get. And I think it really ticks them off to open a new playground. And then, that's just how you tick them completely and get them excited, riled up for the next protest. So why do I say this? Not to garner any empathy, but to say that the job of the mayor is not to be liked by everyone, but it's to make decisions. And I see there's some city leaders out there who just love to talk. And they sit in these panels, they go on TV, they act like news analysts. Your job is not that. Your job is to make a decision. And if people have voted for you, you have to deliver within a limited time frame and make it fast so that people can see the changes of those decisions. So my take is for anyone who's running for council, who's running for mayor, people will judge you by the quality of your enemies. If you make no enemies, you've done nothing. If there's no hate out there, one way not to disturb anyone is just do nothing. But then everybody will make sure they kick you out. So on the issue of the replication of housing, so I had an interesting chat with the mayor Kiko, the mayor of Tokyo, about what to do, with all this spending with the Olympic Village, and we had the same chat with Dan Hidalgo, and I sort of said, well, look, what a great idea! You have state-of-the-art apartments for the athletes, but why don't become a champion for your own people? And instead of knocking them down, why do they turn them into social housing? So I was delighted to be back in Tokyo and to see that they had done exactly that. And then we're lobbying, and I think Anne will absolutely take this into consideration, to use the Paris Olympic Village also for social housing. And all of a sudden you get this boost, and what a pride. You go and stay in the house of the Olympic champions, and you can say Usain Bolt was in this apartment, and what a pride for that kid. So I think it's just a matter of will. There's no rocket science to this. And once the will is there and the mentality is there, and the 10 centimeters work on this purpose, and then you can do the 10,000 apartments. I think cities that have billions to host Olympics and to host World Cups and to host the UEFA Champions League, they should be able to afford this. And if they don't, they can get creative with all kinds of ways. But I think it's 2024. Humanity has never been richer than if you see the world GDP, the world has never been richer. And yet, this disparity has never been wider. And I think that is disturbing, and it's a political decision. on this issue, there's a lot of great networks out there. We just found it with the mayor of Bratislava last month, the child-friendly city network, cities for children, actually. There are projects, and here I'm going to use an example that there's children, but there's also resilient architecture without using that name. We wanted to turn all of downtown car-free. And of course, you know, the cavemen were against it. You know what cavemen is, right? Citizens against virtually everything. You know, so the cavemen is the same group, they're against everything. The cavemen came there and they were against it. But, you know, so was 90% of the public who's used to driving downtown. Then we had a change, you know. We said, look, we're not going to hire PR firms. We're not going to do any of these gimmicks. We're just going to let kids give it a test try. Just like when you get a car, you try it first, or your bike. I would say, why don't kids get to try what it feels to be car-free? So why don't we put, you know, borders, you know, scaffolding against we're in closing all the roads that we eventually want to close in the downtown area, and let them take their skateboards, their monopatins, their bikes, you know, the rollerblades, whatever, and have a car-free day. So of course, you know, the parents were giving me the middle finger, both on Facebook and on real life, to my face. But then these kids started taking over the conversation, because we did it first once a month for 3 months, and then we started every weekend for 6 weekends, and then we made it permanent. And then in 1 year, and you can, if you Google Tirana Downtown Square and Skanderbeg Square, you'll see Dua Lipa Rita Ora, you'll see the fan zone. Now it's like multi-purpose. But how is it resilient? Well, first, how do you win the debate? It was the kids that they don't vote, they don't pay taxes. As politicians, we're always shown polls. What do people think? What did the focus group think? You know, should we lock him up or not lock him up? You know, but that's so stupid, because the city is not a monopoly of only people who vote and pay taxes. Everybody under 18 also is a shareholder in the city. So we said, let's talk to a completely different group. So now these kids, as the parents were fuming in the dinner conversations, these kids were entering the conversation. And these kids were saying, well, you know, Dad, remember the bike you bought me 5 years ago that I never used? This was the first time in this car-free day. So the parents were like, we hate this mayor. But you know, you can be suspicious of a politician, but you cannot be suspicious of your own children, right? So you can say, I hate the mayor, but you know what? I love my child, and if he's having fun, so be it. So then now we poll people, of course. 90% of the people never wanted to change. They wanted car-free, and kids are having fun. And now it's the largest. If you see my Instagram feed, you'll see the largest fan zone in Europe. People cheering like crazy, and they never want to go back to the cars. But how to make it resilient? It's actually not a square. It's a pyramid with a 2% inclination. It was done by 51 North, 4 East, a Belgian architecture firm. Next to it, Bjarke Ingels is doing the National Theatre. Across from it, Stefano Boeri. So I'm mentioning these architects because it's not only the posh cities, they're willing to work for less in a city that is a happening place. I want to be part of this ecosystem. So the 2% inclination of the square does two things. First, it's a metaphor, because before it used to be the dictator who used to be there in a monument. As you go with the 2% inclination in the middle of the square, you've been elevated 2 meters, and you stand in the same pedestal where the dictator used to. So now the owner of the city is the average person, not the car and not a dictator. So the closer you move to the agora, the more elevated you become as a human being. But other than the metaphor, the practical resilient use is that because it has an inclination, it's not like San Marco in Venice, all the water that falls goes in huge deposits. So now we don't spend any money on water. Half it's parking, so it's paid for the square. So and the other half is huge deposits for water. So we call it, we won in Barcelona the best public project award in 2018. So we call it our national square, national pride. We don't call it the resilient square. So you can make it. This is to illustrate that it is possible. You can do resilient things without calling them technocratic names, and it does work. But my last point is, children or other advocates that are not necessarily the usual suspects can be terrific in changing the narrative, as we explain. And sometimes stuff that grown-ups look with suspicion. Oh, he's going to take away our cars, he's going to do this. Then they may take the message earlier, easier, faster, quicker from someone that they don't suspect, which happens to be their own kid.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I know that we are now in need to wrap up, and I wanted to share something that is forward-looking with all of you. And this goes very much, Sheila, to your question of scale. Just a few months back, along with cities from all of the regions in our network, as well as with partners from many of the other city networks and some of our engineering and finance partners, we got together to reflect on 10 years of resilience practice and Resilient Cities Network, and really this question of why things are not scaling as they should and why investment is not coming as it should. When we all know what needs to happen. There's an incredible brain trust in this room, and we've heard it over and over again, right? It's like nature, stupid, people, stupid, right? No, but we're not stupid, right? Actually, this is an incredible, rich brain trust that knows how to do things for multiple benefits. So how do we get there? And so one of the things that we discussed is why we continue to have this really big separation from the policy narrative to what's actually working locally, and these inspiring stories of what's happening locally. And I think probably many of us have heard the story or heard the phrase that history is written by the victors. Well, a lot of the policy analysis is also written by the victors and those who are writing more. And so we came to, and I don't know where the clicker went, but the next slide is the one that I wanted to share with everyone. Oh, no, not that one. There is a second one, which has, where did that go? No, it's changing itself, I think. And this is about Barcelona, and that is not, there it was there. And was essentially that there is an opportunity, I think, to keep, I was sitting on it the whole time, or did you just put it there? Oh! Whoops! I wasn't going to go looking for it. Okay. Moving on. Okay, back to collective action. So there is a need for more action rather than more talking, and I think that's something that we are all very much aligned on. What we are weaving together, along with partners from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which comprises all the major city networks as partners, as well as a number of academics and others, is an urban resilience action agenda, which over the next 3 years is going to aim to really focus on 2 interconnected initiatives. And I wanted to bring this group's attention to them and then really invite conversation about the agenda. Anyone who's here is welcome to join in the action agenda. It is an open invitation. There are 2 really important opportunities that we have as a collective decided to focus on. One is, and I think some folks in this room will be very well aware of this, that we have a really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that exists because the IPCC is writing a special report on cities. It is the only special report that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change will write for the next research cycle. And what is in that report will very much determine where policy goes and where finance flows, because it will determine where solutions are. In the last cities report, 70% of the literature that was included was from developed countries. There is a commitment to do better this time, and there's actually a practitioner group that is advising the IPCC, but it still means that there is a lot of literature that needs to be written and peer-reviewed to be included by those authors. So it is a rallying call to anyone who does research, analysis, practice, to help aggregate that and talk about really what's working and what's not working and share it with the IPCC for this report. It is immensely important. The second piece of it is actually about flipping the script. Many of us who have been in the space for long and have the scars to tell about it will probably be tired of hearing that there are no investable projects and that cities have to do better at preparing projects. Well, cities shouldn't be out there pitching, right? Cities need to be empowered to create portfolios of projects that work for the local community. Because as we heard loud and clear, being a city leader is about having a clear vision and inviting people to share in delivering quality public services. And so there is a need to work together on creating meaningful portfolios that have those kinds of benefits, and to commit to doing that as a community. We can only do that with the commitment of investors, with the commitment of financial institutions to do so. So this is the action agenda. I'm very happy to continue to talk to folks about it, and I really do hope that when we look at next steps and calls to action and things tomorrow, that many of you will join us in doing this. And I also want to take this opportunity. What's that? So the time frame is, so we've just launched it. It is live on our LinkedIn page as of today. There's going to be 3 months of commitment period. And at New York Climate Week, there'll be a community of practice meeting. There'll also be virtual meetings around this with the convening partners. So there's time. You don't have to sign on the dotted line at this convening. And with that, I also, again, want to thank all of you for the incredible energy that you've brought to this today. I hope that everyone is leaving this conversation knowing more about urban resilience and how to enact it than you did when you started this panel, and how to involve the private sector. I want to ask everybody to give a huge round of applause to this incredible panel.